The air smelled like rain before I even saw the clouds. Out there, in the far stretch of Montana wilderness, the sky could change its mood faster than a city stranger could blink. I had been walking since morning, tracing a thin trail that wound between pine ridges and tall grass. My backpack felt heavier than it should have. Maybe because I wasn't really hiking to see the mountains. I was trying to leave something behind. A heartbreak, a burnout, a version of myself that had forgotten how to breathe. I had quit my job in Chicago a week earlier. Bought a used Jeep, drove until the roads turned to dirt, and camped wherever the world felt empty enough to listen. I told myself I was fine. That isolation was good medicine. But solitude has a way of talking back. The more the silence stretched, the louder my thoughts became. By the time the afternoon light started to fade, the clouds had rolled in, thick, bruised, and threatening. The first drop hit my cheek like a warning. Then another. Then 100 more. Thunder cracked somewhere behind the mountains, echoing like a gunshot. I pulled my hood up and kept walking, though I had no idea where the trail had gone. The rain blurred everything, the sky, the trees, even the shape of my own hands. I must have taken a wrong turn. One step too far to the left, and the ground disappeared beneath me. I slid down a steep slope, grabbing at roots and rocks until I hit the bottom with a sickening thud. Pain shot up my right leg, white and sharp. I cried out before I could stop myself. The world spun and rain poured into my mouth when I tried to breathe. I crawled under a fallen tree, clutching my leg. It felt wrong, swollen and hot beneath the fabric. My flashlight had cracked in the fall, leaving me with nothing but flashes of lightning to see by. I told myself to stay calm, to wait out the storm. But the wind howled through the branches like something alive, and my body shook uncontrollably from cold. Minutes turned into hours. Or maybe it was just 10 minutes that felt like forever. My hands went numb, my head heavy. I remember thinking, this is how people disappear. The wilderness just swallows them whole. Then, faintly beneath the roar of the rain, I heard it. Hooves, slow and steady, crunching through wet earth. At first I thought I was hallucinating, but the sound grew louder, closer. A shape emerged through the blur. A man on horseback, wrapped in a dark coat, hat pulled low. He swung off the saddle and crouched beside me, the smell of leather and rain mixing in the air. "Hey," he said, voice rough but calm. "You hurt?" I nodded weakly. "My leg," I managed to say. He pressed gentle fingers along my shin, frowning. "You're lucky it's not broken clean through. You're bleeding, though." His accent was faintly southern, maybe Texan, warm against the cold night. Before I could respond, he shrugged off his coat and draped it around me. "You're freezing," he muttered. Then, without another word, he whistled softly to his horse and hoisted me up as if I weighed nothing. Pain flared again, but his grip was steady, strong, reassuring. "Where are you taking me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Cabin's not far," he said. "You won't make it out here alone." The world tilted as he lifted me onto the saddle, his arms briefly circling around my waist to steady me. He climbed up behind, the warmth of his body pressing against my back. The rain kept falling, but somehow it felt less cold. As the horse started moving through the darkness, I heard him whisper close to my ear, his voice almost lost in the storm. "You'll be all right now," he said softly. "I got you." And for the first time that night, I believed him. The world came back to me in flashes of firelight and the scent of wood smoke. My body ached all over, but the warmth seeping through the air felt almost unreal after the storm's bite. When my eyes focused, I saw him. Broad-shouldered, damp hat tossed aside, coaxing a small fire to life inside a wooden cabin that looked like it had stood here for decades. He turned when he heard me stir. "You're awake," he said, voice steady but gentle. "Good. I was starting to worry you'd gone and passed out for good." I tried to sit up, but pain shot through my leg sharp enough to make me gasp. He was beside me in an instant, pressing a firm hand on my shoulder. "Easy there," he murmured. "You took quite a tumble." I blinked at him through the dim light. He was rugged, weathered skin, stubble shadowing his jaw, and eyes that looked like they'd seen more than their share of storms. There was something kind in them, though. Something grounding. Where are we?" I asked, my voice still shaking. "My place," he said, nodding toward the window streaked with rain. "About 6 miles from where I found you. Storm's still raging out there, so you'll be staying put till morning." I looked around. The cabin was small but solid. A single bed pushed against the wall, A rough-hewn table, shelves lined with jars and tools, and the fire crackling in a stone hearth. Everything smelled of pine and smoke and him. He crouched down beside me again, his hand steady as he examined my leg. "You've got a bad cut here," he said. "I cleaned it as best I could, but I'll wrap it properly now. Might sting some." I nodded, biting down on the inside of my cheek as he peeled back the torn fabric of my jeans. His touch was surprisingly careful for a man who looked like he could break a log in half with his bare hands. He cleaned the wound, wrapped it tight with a strip of clean cloth, then looked up to meet my eyes. "Name's Eli," he said simply. I managed a weak smile. "I'm Ryan," he nodded. "Well, Ryan, you're lucky I came by that way. That ridge gets nasty when it rains. Could have been worse." "Yeah," I said quietly. "I guess I owe you one." Eli shrugged, standing to toss another log into the fire. "Don't owe me a thing. Just glad you're breathing." He walked over to a wooden chest and pulled out a thick wool blanket, then hesitated. "You're soaked through," he said, almost apologetically. "You'll freeze if you stay in those clothes." I hesitated too, suddenly aware of the tension humming between us. "Right. Yeah, you're probably right." He turned slightly, giving me space but still close enough to catch me if I lost balance. I peeled off my wet shirt with shaking hands, goosebumps rising instantly. The air inside was warmer than outside, but my skin still burned from the cold. Eli's eyes flickered to me once, just once, then he looked away, jaw tightening. He handed me a dry flannel shirt, one that smelled faintly of cedar and leather. "Here," he said softly. "It's clean. Should fit well enough." When I slipped it on, the fabric brushed against my skin like warmth itself. I pulled the blanket around my shoulders, sinking deeper into the firelight. For the first time since I'd fallen, I let out a slow breath. Eli sat down across from me, elbows resting on his knees, watching the fire. The rain outside beat steadily on the roof, a low rhythm that filled the quiet. For a while, neither of us said anything. It wasn't awkward, just peaceful. After a few minutes, he stood again and went to the small stove. "You hungry?" My stomach growled before I could answer. He smirked. "I'll take that as a yes." He opened a tin of beans, poured them into a pot, and warmed them up. The simple smell of food was suddenly the best thing I'd ever known. When he handed me the plate, his fingers brushed mine, warm, rough, steady, and something electric passed through the touch. I pretended not to notice, but my chest tightened anyway. As we ate, conversation came easier. He told me he ran cattle in the summers, trapped in the winters, mostly kept to himself. "Guess I got used to the quiet," he said, eyes glancing toward the window. "Not much reason to head into town anymore." "What about family?" I asked. He shook his head. "Folks are gone. Brother's somewhere down in Texas, but we haven't talked in years." He looked at me as if realizing how that might sound. "I ain't complaining, though. Some of us are just better alone." I smiled faintly. "I thought the same thing." He tilted his head. "Thought? I came out here to get away from everything," I said. "Work people. Feelings I didn't want to deal with. Guess I thought running from them might fix things." He was quiet for a long moment, just watching the fire. Then he said softly, "Funny thing about running. The harder you go, the faster life catches up." I looked at him and our eyes met. There was something raw in his gaze, like he wasn't just talking about me. The firelight painted his face in amber tones, outlining the strength of his jaw, the calm steadiness of his eyes. I wanted to ask him what he'd run from, but I didn't. The question hung there in the air, unspoken, and yet somehow answered in silence. When I finished eating, Eli took my plate and set it aside. The cabin had gone quieter, except for the rain easing into a soft drizzle. I could feel sleep tugging at me, but I didn't want to close my eyes. Not yet. He knelt beside the bed, adjusting the blanket around my shoulders. "You should rest now," he said quietly. "You've had enough of a day." I nodded, too tired to argue. He hesitated for a second, like he wanted to say something more, but instead he just gave a faint smile and turned back toward the fire. As I drifted off, the last thing I saw was him sitting there in the glow, his hat in his hands, his eyes thoughtful and distant, as if keeping watch over me wasn't just duty but something he needed to do. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, only that the storm had found its voice again. Thunder shook the walls of the cabin like a warning from the heavens, and the wind screamed through the cracks in the wood. The fire had burned low, a dull orange glow pulsing in the hearth. My leg throbbed like a drumbeat in my body, every pulse of pain pulling me further from sleep. For a moment, I didn't remember where I was. The shadows danced strangely across the room, and the howling outside made me feel small again, like the world had swallowed me whole. I tried to sit up, but the movement sent a sharp pain through my leg. My breath caught, panic rising fast and ugly in my throat. Hey, easy now. Eli's voice cut through the noise like something solid. He was suddenly beside me, his hand on my shoulder, steady and warm. I hadn't even heard him move from his chair. His eyes reflected the firelight, calm but alert. "You're okay," he said softly. "You're safe. Breathe for me." I didn't realize how tightly I'd been holding my breath until I let it out. The storm rumbled again, closer this time. I flinched. He squeezed my shoulder gently. "It's just thunder," he said. "Won't hurt you none." "I know," I whispered, my voice shaking anyway. "It's just everything feels off, like I'm still falling." Eli looked at me for a long moment, then reached out and took my hand. His palm was rough and calloused, but his touch was careful, deliberate. "You're not falling anymore," he murmured. "You're right here." I let my fingers tighten around his without meaning to. His hand was larger than mine, strong enough to steady me even when I couldn't steady myself. We sat there like that for a while, the silence between thunderclaps stretching long and full. "Does it always storm like this?" I asked finally. He shook his head. "Not often. But when it does, it reminds you how small you are." His eyes drifted toward the window, where lightning flashed faintly. "Out here, the world don't care much what you've been through. It just keeps going. Sometimes that's comforting, sometimes it ain't." I studied him through the flickering light, the way his expression softened when he wasn't trying to be stoic, the faint lines near his eyes that came from squinting against sun and wind. There was something haunted in his calmness, as if peace was something he'd had to earn the hard way. "You live here alone?" I asked quietly. He nodded. "Been that way near 5 years now. Doesn't it get lonely?" He gave a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, but you get used to it. You stop expecting much from people and the silence starts sounding like company." I hesitated. "I think I know what you mean. City boy like you?" He raised an eyebrow. I let out a small, shaky laugh. "You'd be surprised. I was surrounded by people every day, meetings, noise, screens, all of it. But I don't think I've ever felt more alone than I did there." He nodded slowly, eyes thoughtful. "Funny thing, ain't it? Some folks run to the wild because they can't stand people. Others run because they're hoping somebody'll find them." That last sentence lingered in the air between us. The fire cracked softly, filling the silence neither of us dared to break. When I finally looked up, Eli was already looking at me. His eyes caught the glow from the fire, deep brown, almost golden at the edges. I didn't know what he was thinking, but I felt it. The air between us shifted like something unspoken had found its voice. He didn't move at first, just breathed quietly, his thumb brushing against my knuckles. Then, with a hesitant motion, he leaned a little closer. "Ryan," he said, my name low and rough in his throat. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it. "Yeah?" He paused, his face inches from mine. "I don't want to cross a line." "You're not," I whispered. That was all it took. His breath mingled with mine for a heartbeat before his lips found me. Soft at first, uncertain, like he was afraid I'd pull away. But I didn't. The kiss deepened naturally, quietly, like it had been waiting for its chance. His hand slid to the back of my neck, anchoring me to something real. It wasn't wild or rushed, it was the kind of kiss that made everything outside fade away. The rain, the thunder, the ache in my leg, all of it dimmed beneath the warmth spreading through my chest. He tasted like coffee and smoke and something raw, something honest. When we finally broke apart, he kept his forehead pressed to mine, breathing hard but quiet. The storm outside cracked again, but this time it sounded distant, harmless. "I shouldn't have done that," he murmured, though his hand was still holding mine. I swallowed, my voice barely there. "I'm glad you did." He gave a small broken laugh like he didn't quite believe what was happening. "You don't know what you're saying, city boy. I ain't the kind you take home." "I'm not thinking about home," I said, echoing his drawl just slightly. "I'm thinking about now." He looked at me for a long time, studying, searching, before he sighed and pulled me closer. I went willingly, feeling his chest against my back, his arms wrapping around me as though he needed proof I was real. The fire threw a warm orange halo across the walls and his heartbeat pulsed against my shoulder, steady and grounding. We didn't talk after that. Words would have only broken the quiet magic that had settled between us. I could feel his breath against my neck, slow and even, and somewhere in the middle of that rhythm I stopped shaking. Outside, the storm began to fade. The thunder rolled further and further away until it was nothing but a low murmur. The rain softened, then stopped. Eli's arm stayed draped over me, heavy and warm. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of it lull me toward sleep. For the first time in months, maybe years, I didn't dream about falling or running or losing. As I drifted off, my last clear thought was a whisper that wasn't quite spoken but felt truer than anything I'd said aloud. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. When I woke, the world was golden. Morning light spilled through the cabin window, soft and warm, touching everything it could reach. The floorboards, the old wooden table, the edge of the blanket tangled around me. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. I only felt warmth, the steady rhythm of a heartbeat pressed against my back, the weight of an arm loosely draped around my waist. Then memory came rushing in. The storm, the kiss, Eli's arms around me through the night. I didn't move at first. I just lay there, listening to the quiet rise and fall of his breathing. The smell of smoke and pine hung in the air, mixed with something faintly human, leather, soap, and sleep. Outside, the world was still. The rain had passed, leaving only the distant call of a bird and the dripping of water from the roof. I shifted slightly enough to feel the warmth of his chest against my shoulder blades. That simple contact made something flutter in my chest, part comfort, part confusion. Eli stirred behind me. His breath changed rhythm, and a second later, his arm tensed before he carefully pulled it back. The air between us cooled almost instantly. I rolled over to see him sitting up, rubbing a hand over his face, trying not to meet my eyes. His hat lay forgotten on the floor beside the bed, and in the daylight he looked softer somehow, less like the quiet, unshakable man from the night before and more like someone who wasn't sure what to do next. "Morning," I said quietly. He nodded, still not looking at me. "Morning." The silence that followed felt heavier than thunder. I wanted to say something, to thank him, to ask what last night meant, but the words tangled in my throat. Finally, I sat up, pulling the blanket around my shoulders. I wanted to thank you," I said, "for taking care of me, for saving my life, honestly." He shook his head, staring into the dying embers of the fire. "Don't mention it." "I mean it, Eli. I'd be in a ditch somewhere if you hadn't come along." His jaw tightened slightly, and then he muttered, almost too quietly, "Didn't mean to cross a line." I blinked, surprised by the roughness in his voice. "What line?" He looked up then, finally meeting my gaze. "Last night." He stopped, searching for words. "I shouldn't have let things happen the way they did. You were hurt, scared, He exhaled, shaking his head. "I got caught up in something I shouldn't have." I watched him for a long moment, then smiled softly. "Eli, you didn't cross anything." His eyes flickered, uncertain. "You sure about that?" I nodded. I was there too. I could have pulled away. Something in his shoulders eased at that. The tension that had stiffened his posture softened, though his expression stayed cautious. "Guess it's been a long while since I had company," he admitted, his voice quieter now. "Didn't realize how much I'd missed just touching someone." I swallowed, feeling that same ache echo in my own chest. "You're not the only one." He gave a faint smile, more like an apology than anything else, and stood to stoke the fire. "Well," he said, slipping back into his steady tone, "you probably need food. Can't have you starving on me now." He busied himself with the coffee pot, his movements careful, almost overly deliberate, as if pretending everything was normal could make it so. I watched him from the bed, the sunlight outlining the shape of his shoulders beneath his worn shirt. There was something quietly magnetic about the way he moved, solid, self-reliant, but with a gentleness he tried hard to hide. Breakfast was simple, beans reheated from the night before, a couple slices of bread and black coffee. We didn't talk much while we ate, but the silence had shifted. It wasn't heavy anymore, just quiet, familiar. Every so often our eyes met, and neither of us looked away as quickly as we might have an hour ago. When I finished eating, Eli cleared the dishes and leaned against the table. "How's the leg?" he asked. I moved it slightly and winced. "Better, I think. Still hurts when I put weight on it." "Figures," he said, nodding. "You'll need a few more days before you can walk proper. Once you're steady enough, I'll get you back to the main road. Someone will be passing by that can take you into town." Something in me tightened at the thought of leaving. It made sense, of course. My life wasn't here, but the cabin suddenly felt too warm, too alive to imagine walking away from. Right, I said, forcing a small smile. Back to civilization. Eli didn't answer right away. He just looked at me for a long second, eyes unreadable. Then he nodded once, slow and deliberate. Yeah, civilization. He turned back toward the window where sunlight streamed through the dust motes and painted gold across the floorboards. For a while, neither of us spoke again, but I could feel it. The quiet current running between us, the unspoken question neither of us dared to ask. And though he hadn't said it yet, I knew Eli had already made up his mind. The moment I could stand on my own, he'd see to it I made it safely back to the world I'd come from. But as I sat there in his shirt, the smell of coffee still lingering in the air, part of me already wished I'd never have to go. The days that followed passed in a kind of quiet rhythm neither of us spoke about, but both seemed to understand. My leg healed slowly, each step less painful than the one before. Eli made sure I walked a little farther every morning, steadying me with a hand under my arm when I stumbled. The air out here was crisp and alive. The scent of sagebrush after rain, the sound of wind moving through the grass. For the first time in years, I felt the world breathing again, and I was breathing with it. Eli was different in daylight. Out on the plains, he was more talkative, though still in that measured, thoughtful way of his. He'd whistle sometimes when we rode, low tunes that drifted over the wind. When I asked what they were, he said they were old cowboy songs, things he half remembered from his father or from long nights around a campfire. I told him I used to play guitar when I was younger, and he smiled. A real one this time, not the guarded one he usually wore. Guess we'd make a fine pair of wanderin' musicians then, he said. I laughed. You mean you'd sing and I'd limp along behind? He grinned, tipping his hat. Something like that. Those moments, small, fleeting, stitched between chores and rides, built something I couldn't name. We talked about everything and nothing. He told me about the horses he'd broken, the storms he'd outrun, the winters that nearly froze him to death. I told him about the city, how it never really slept, how people moved past each other like ghosts. One afternoon, while the horses grazed by a creek, I found myself asking the question that had been lingering for days. You ever miss it? I said. People, I mean, company. Eli skipped a small stone across the water. It bounced twice before sinking. Sometimes, he said. Used to have it once. Someone to come home to. I turned to him, quiet. What happened? He didn't look at me. He died, he said simply. Got sick. Happened fast. Wasn't nothing I could do. There was no tremor in his voice. But there was something else, an old settled pain, like a scar that still ached when the weather turned cold. I'm sorry, I said softly. He nodded, still watching the water. Been a long time. You learn to stop expecting folks to stay. Easier that way. I wanted to reach out to touch his hand, but I didn't. The wind rustled the grass between us, carrying the scent of wild mint. That night, as we sat outside the cabin, the sky burned gold and crimson over the horizon. The land stretched out endless before us, rolling into the distance like a painting too big to fit in the frame. The horses stood quiet in the fading light, and the sound of the windmill creaked lazily in the background. Neither of us spoke for a long time. There was no need to. The silence wasn't heavy, it was soft, full. A kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. Eli leaned back on his elbows, eyes half closed against the light. You'll be heading back soon, huh? He said finally. The words hit me harder than I expected. I watched the sunlight catch in his hair, the warm gold glow brushing over his jaw. I suppose so, I said. Once I can make it to the road. He nodded, still looking out at the horizon. World's waiting for you, I reckon. Folks like you don't stay out here long. Folks like me? He glanced at me then, a faint teasing glint in his eyes. The ones with somewhere to be. I looked away, down at my hands. Maybe I did once, I said quietly. But I'm not sure I want to go back there now. That made him look at me fully. For a long time he didn't move, didn't speak, just studied me as if trying to decide whether I meant it. You don't mean that, he said eventually, his voice softer than the wind. I think I do. The world felt very still then. The last of the sunlight touched the grass around us, turning it to fire. And for a moment, I wanted to believe we could stay suspended in that golden hour forever. Two men at the edge of nowhere, finally unafraid of being seen. Eli looked away, his throat moving as he swallowed. "You're something, you know that." I smiled faintly. "That a good thing or a bad thing?" He chuckled under his breath. "Haven't decided yet." The sun dipped lower, spilling its last light across the plains. I felt his hand move, slow and unsure, until it found mine where it rested between us. He didn't hold it tightly, just a gentle touch. Fingers brushing like a promise neither of us was ready to speak aloud. We sat like that, saying nothing as the day faded into dusk and the world turned quiet again. The sky above us deepened to violet, and I thought, not for the first time, that maybe the universe had brought me here for a reason. And under that wide, endless sky with Eli's hand warm against mine, I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't ready to say goodbye. The morning came quietly, as if the land itself was reluctant to wake. Pale sunlight spilled across the hills, touching the grass with a soft golden shimmer. I could smell coffee before I even opened my eyes. The cabin was warm, filled with the low crackle of the fire and the soft rustle of Eli moving about. My leg didn't ache anymore, not the way it used to. I could walk now, ride even. And that meant one thing: it was time to go. He didn't say it outright, and neither did I, but the truth hung between us like the smell of smoke, impossible to ignore. My bag sat by the door, already packed with my clothes and a few supplies Eli insisted I take. He'd been quiet all morning, speaking only to ask if I wanted more coffee or if I thought the weather looked good for traveling. I watched him as he moved around the room, pretending to be busy, folding a blanket that didn't need folding, checking the saddle twice. "You don't have to fuss so much," I said gently. He stopped, hands on his belt buckle, then gave a small shrug. "Just making sure you got what you need." I tried to smile, but it came out crooked. "Guess you've done that since the day you found me." That made him pause. His eyes met mine for a heartbeat, warm, sad, unguarded. "Reckon you made it easy to care for." I didn't trust myself to speak after that. We ate in silence. The only sounds were the clink of cutlery and the wind brushing against the cabin walls. It wasn't the kind of silence that begged to be broken. It was the kind that hurt because you knew it meant goodbye. When the time finally came, Eli saddled the horse and adjusted the stirrup for me. His movements were steady, but his jaw was tight. I stood there, my pack slung over my shoulder, trying to find something to say that didn't sound like an ending. He tightened the reins and handed them to me without looking up. "Trail's clear all the way to the main road," he said. "Shouldn't have trouble finding a ride once you get there." "Thanks," I murmured. My voice felt small. "For everything." He nodded, his hat shadowing his eyes. "Take care out there." I swallowed hard, my fingers gripping the saddle horn. That should have been it. The clean break, the polite farewell. But something inside me refused to move. The horse shifted under me as I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked back at him, at the man who'd found me in the storm, patched me up, cooked for me, held me when I couldn't hold myself together. And suddenly the words tore out of me before I could stop them. "Eli, I don't want to go." He froze. For a long moment he didn't even breathe. Then he lifted his head slowly, his eyes locking onto mine. There was something raw there, fear, hope, disbelief all tangled together. "What did you say?" he asked softly. I slid off the horse, my boots crunching against the dirt. My throat burned as I spoke. I said I don't want to go. Not back there. Not away from you. The wind caught the words and carried them out into the open plains as if they belonged to the world now. Eli stood perfectly still, his hands curled into fists, then relaxed. He took a step forward, then another. "Don't say that unless you mean it," he said, his voice shaking just a little. "Don't say it because it sounds good out here." I met his gaze, tears blurring the edges of his face. "I've never meant anything more." For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then he crossed the last few feet between us, reached up and cupped my face in his rough, calloused hands. His thumbs brushed against my cheeks, trembling slightly. His breath was warm against my lips when he whispered, "Damn it, you're gonna make it hard to breathe again." Then he kissed me. It wasn't hesitant like before, it was full, desperate, real. All the quiet moments, the late-night talks, the stolen glances, they all poured into that single kiss. I felt everything we hadn't said come alive in that touch. His hand slid to the back of my neck, holding me as if afraid I'd disappear. I clung to him just as tightly, my fingers tangled in his shirt. When we finally pulled apart, both of us were breathing hard. He rested his forehead against mine, eyes still closed. "I've been alone a long time," he said hoarsely. "Didn't think I could feel this way again." "You're not alone," I whispered. "Not anymore." He gave a shaky laugh, half disbelief, half relief. "You sure about this? Ain't much here but dust and sky." I smiled through the tears that kept falling. "Then I guess that's all I need." He stepped back, looking at me as though he needed to memorize the sight, his eyes bright and wet, his jaw trembling despite his best effort to stay composed. "Then stay," he said finally. "There's space here for two." For a moment the world went quiet. The horse snorted softly beside us. The wind moved through the grass and the morning sun broke through the clouds, spilling gold over everything. I looked down at the bag hanging from my shoulder, everything I thought I needed to survive out there, and let it slip from my hand. It hit the dirt with a dull thud. Eli's eyes widened, then softened as I stepped closer. "Then I'm home," I said. He smiled, small at first, then full and unguarded. He reached for me again, pulling me into his arms. The weight of everything I'd carried, loneliness, fear, the ache of always running, fell away in that moment. All that was left was warmth. The wind picked up, sweeping around us, carrying the smell of wild grass and rain. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk called out and the sky opened wide and endless above. And there, in the middle of nowhere, I finally knew what it meant to belong. The seasons turned gently, almost without me noticing. Winter melted into spring, and the hills around the ranch came alive again. Green grass rolling like waves, wildflowers spilling color across the plains. It had been months since that morning I dropped my bag and told Eli I was home. And somehow every day since then had felt like a small miracle. Quiet, simple, real. Life out here wasn't easy, but it was honest. We woke up before the sun most mornings, the sky still pale and cold, our breath misting in the air. Eli would pour 2 mugs of coffee, strong enough to wake the dead, and we'd sit on the porch steps, boots resting in the dust, watching the light crawl slowly over the land. He never said much during those moments, just nodded toward the horizon like he was greeting an old friend. Sometimes he'd glance at me, eyes soft, and that said more than words ever could. We worked side by side most days, mending fences, feeding the horses, checking the water troughs. My leg healed fully not long after I decided to stay, though Eli still pretended to worry every time I limped even a little. I told him once he worried too much. He just smirked and said, "Only 'cause you don't do enough of it yourself." The truth was, I hadn't felt this alive in years. There was something deeply grounding about the rhythm of it all. The creak of the saddle, the smell of leather and hay, the sun burning slow and steady across the sky. At night, when the world went still and the stars stretched endlessly above, we'd lie side by side in the small cabin that had once felt like a stranger's place but now felt entirely ours. His arm would be around me, heavy and sure, and the sound of his breathing would lull me to sleep. It wasn't a life of grand gestures or declarations. It was built on small things, the way he'd brush dirt off my shoulder without thinking, or how I'd find an extra cup of coffee waiting for me even when he swore he hadn't made one. The laughter that came easy now, the quiet glances that said I'm here without needing to say it. Sometimes, when the evenings turned golden and soft, we'd take the horses out past the fence line where the land opened wide and unending. Eli liked to ride ahead just far enough to make me chase him a little. "Keep up, city boy," he'd call over his shoulder, and I'd laugh, pretending to be out of breath. One such evening, as we slowed near the ridge overlooking the valley, I watched him in the fading light, the wind tugging at his shirt, his eyes glowing amber with the sun. He turned to look at me, smiling in that quiet way he did, and for a second the world seemed to still. "I still can't believe I found you that night," I said softly. He tilted his head, thoughtful. "Reckon you found me just as much as I found you." I let the words settle between us. The air smelled like wild grass and pine. "You know," I said after a moment, "you found me broken, but you never tried to fix me." Eli's gaze met mine, steady and warm. "Didn't think you needed fixin'," he said simply. "Just someone to hold you till you healed yourself." Something inside me ached, sweetly this time, not from pain, but from gratitude. I reached out, brushing my hand against his. Our fingers touched briefly, the contact small but grounding, like the earth itself reminding me that I was right where I belonged. We rode a little farther until the sun began to sink below the horizon, painting everything in gold and fire. The horses' hooves thudded softly against the ground, and the air shimmered with the quiet hum of crickets. Eli glanced over, and our hands brushed again, lingering just a heartbeat longer. There was no need for words anymore. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was full of everything we'd built, everything we'd survived. Sometimes, when I think back to the man I was before, the one who went into the wilderness looking for something he couldn't name, I realize he never really came back. Maybe he didn't need to. Out here, under this endless sky, I'd become someone new, someone whole. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of rain from far off. I looked at Eli, the setting sun blazing behind him, and smiled. He reached over, his hand finding mine fully this time, fingers threading together as the horizon opened wide before us. And as we rode toward the light, two silhouettes against the vast, forgiving plains, I knew this was it. The quiet I'd been searching for, the peace I never thought I'd find. Out here, where the world is quiet, he's my forever.